weakness.
Briefly, in other news, domestic news, lots of Labour pain in the Gorton by-election, of course, but isn't the other lesson of that by-election that if you want to oppose this government from the right in seats in urban northern England and similar, that you vote for a party?
Sometimes a politician walks into a TV interview thinking they're about to deliver a few talking points, and instead they walk straight into a trap they didn't even see coming. That's exactly what happened here. In this clip, Priti Patel steps into a live television interview expecting a routine political discussion. But within moments, the conversation takes a turn, and suddenly the spotlight is on something far more uncomfortable: the glaring double standards surrounding the recent by-election in Gorton and Denton. As the questions start coming in, Patel tries to defend a controversial narrative about voting patterns and political influence. But the more she speaks, the more the contradictions begin to pile up. And before long, the argument starts to unravel right there on live television. Because what begins as a confident defense quickly turns into a moment where the logic simply doesn't hold together, and the interviewer isn't letting it slide. This is one of those interviews where the tension slowly builds as the inconsistencies become impossible to ignore. And by the time the exchange reaches its peak, the double standards are sitting out in the open for everyone watching to see. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let's watch how this moment unfolded, and then we'll break down exactly what happened.
Briefly, in other news, domestic news, lots of Labour pain in the Gorton by-election, of course, but isn't the other lesson of that by-election that if you want to oppose this government from the right in seats in urban northern England and similar, that you vote for a party getting 27% of the vote, i.e. Reform, not a minor party status in seats like this, yours, with 2%?
So I think we have to remember that that particular constituency was Labour's sixth most safest seat. You know, we were not contenders in that by-election at all. The real issue about that by-election, the real story, is just the fact that people have lost faith in this government and in Keir Starmer. He's got no authority whatsoever.
No faith in you in their place.
I've made it quite clear to you that is not a Conservative seat where we were in contention. It is
Labour. You should do better in it.
It was Labour's sixth safest seat. So on that basis alone, it was clear that it was a battle for Labour and Labour's vote, and Labour is a party of the left, and people have chosen to abandon
and if you're on the right,
Party.
If you're on the right, which 27% of the people in that constituency are, they turn to Reform and not you.
Well, I don't know how you can describe Reform. I'm not here to be a commentator on Reform.
They're a party of the right, aren't they?
I'm telling you now. Well, they
got lots of your ex-colleagues in for a start.
Well, they voted with Labour on on various issues such as welfare and the two-child cap. So I don't think they can.
You don't think they're a party of the right?
They can't associate themselves with the Conservative Party.
No, they don't want to do that.
So look, the reality is that we were not in contention in that seat, and it was Labour's sixth most safest seat. So this is obviously a crisis in the Labour Party.
Your leader released a statement in the aftermath of that by-election where she described, quote, Labour created the monster of the Muslim community block vote. What does she mean by that?
Well, she was pointing out to the sectarian voting that is clearly now taking place.
Why is it sectarian?
On the basis that it was very much targeted at particular... I mean, if you look at some of the tactics that the Green Party have used and all the rest of it, and the fact now that potentially the Electoral Commission are looking into the voting trends and patterns that took place in that constituency, Lewis, we should be concerned about that. We live in a democracy, and that should be looked at. So I don't think we can overlook that issue whatsoever.
No, nor should we. But aren't Dame Priti those two quite distinct things? Obviously, if there's been any interference with the electoral process, completely illegal, wrong, needs to be looked at and stamped out.
To look at it, it's looking at one particular community and how they voted in that by-election.
But there's a difference between that, isn't there, and Muslim voters deciding reasonably en masse that there are certain parties that represent their interests, and they come to that view as individuals. Ethnic minority communities have always done that throughout democratic history. Why is it a problem when Muslims do it?
Primarily in this particular case, because it's specific to this particular by-election, I think we should just recognise that.
Camille Baylinnot was talking about something that happened more historically than that. She's talking about Labour created the monster of the Muslim community block
because, of
vote.
course, they have recently, clearly been playing the Muslim community in terms of securing their own electoral base.
You mean targeting the Muslim community?
Their politics, when it comes, look at the politics in their own
party.
But
your party has, for example, targeted British Indian voters in recent elections. Why is that any different?
No, that's a choice for them in terms of how they vote. We're not telling them how to vote.
But that's a choice for Muslims, they vote.
I think in this by-election it was very particular, and I think now that there are going to be potential investigations by the Electoral Commission.
This is a video that the 2019 election that your then colleague Shailesh Vara put out aimed specifically at British Indian voters.
इस देश को आज बचाना है,
कुछ करके हमें दिखाना है।
तो वोट करो बोरिस जॉनसन, वोट करो बोरिस जॉनसन। ब्रिटेन के पीएम बनेंगे बोरिस जॉनसन, बोरिस जॉनसन।
Conservatives, British Indians. Is that sectarian?
That's his part of an election campaign, a national election campaign that all political parties
And that's
do.
what the Green Party were doing, targeting Muslim
you
voters.
could have shown the one for the Labour Party that they probably ran in that election, and other
I'm not
political
saying
parties
it's
as well.
improper, but your leader is saying there's something improper about
Lewis,
targeting particular
I think
communities.
we should absolutely say in this instance, this could potentially be looked at by the Electoral Commission in terms of voting patterns within the Muslim community. That is something not to be dismissed or taken lightly.
I'm not
and I think
dismissing
on that basis, until we see further details, which are now being questioned, the Labour Party has clearly been targeting, and we saw that during the last general election against the Gazan independents, and we know that they're incredibly insecure now as a political party, and they have been targeting the Muslim vote through their own national policies, such as Palestine two-state solutions.
Different votes. Historically, the Jewish vote, Indian
it has changed, Lewis. It has changed. You've seen that. You've seen that since the last general election, and the way the Labour Party in particular have been behaving around Gaza and their own voter base. And I think that was tantamount and paramount in this particular by-election.
One final.
Now that we've seen the exchange, let's actually unpack what just happened, because the contradiction on display here is hard to ignore. What we're hearing from some conservative voices and figures on the hard right is a dramatic claim that the Green Party somehow did something improper simply by campaigning on issues that resonate with Muslim voters in the Gorton and Denton by-election. The suggestion being pushed is that this represents some kind of suspicious community bloc voting that deserves investigation or scrutiny. But here's the question that immediately follows. How is it suddenly controversial when one party speaks to issues that matter to Muslim voters, yet perfectly normal political strategy when the conservatives themselves produce targeted campaign messaging for other communities? Because that isn't hypothetical. In recent elections, the Conservative Party has released campaign material aimed specifically at British Indian voters. Entire videos, messaging campaigns, and outreach efforts designed to appeal directly to that demographic. And no one in those moments described it as a threat to democracy. No one suggested that voters responding to that messaging were part of some improper bloc vote. It was simply called campaigning. So why does that logic suddenly change depending on which community we're talking about? Why is it considered completely acceptable for one group of voters to support parties that represent their interests, but when Muslim voters appear to do the exact same thing, it's framed as something suspicious or dangerous? That's the inconsistency that the interviewer was clearly pressing on. And the numbers themselves make the narrative even harder to sustain. In Gorton and Denton, the white population actually makes up around 57% of the electorate, meaning the majority of voters in that constituency are white. Yet some commentators have tried to frame the election result as if a minority community somehow dominated or hijacked the democratic process. The reality is much less dramatic. Political parties target specific groups all the time. Some focus heavily on older voters. Others appeal strongly to wealthy donors or particular economic classes. Reform UK and the Conservatives themselves often direct their messaging toward older voters or higher income groups. That's not unusual. It's how political campaigning works. So when outrage suddenly appears only when certain communities vote in ways that challenge particular political narratives, people start to notice the double standard. Because at the end of the day, voters responded to a party that appeared to speak to their concerns and priorities. That's not a conspiracy, it's simply democracy functioning the way it always has. But what do you think about this debate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates like this.